And it's celebrating who we are, which is so wonderful. And I love being gay.
The Change Podcast. Everything changes, everything stays the same.
Why does everything keep on changing?
Here we are, like three monkeys. Hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil.
I love it. That's going in the podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Change Podcast. We're here again. Same location, new setup, different face in the group. Who is it? I'll pass it on to Shane to introduce.
Hey all, look, I'm here this time with my very good friend, Anthony Venn-Brown. Hi, Anthony.
Hello, Shane.
We have known each other a long time now, going on 2 decades actually.
2004.
It was indeed. In fact, we met in similar circumstances recording a video, didn't we?
We met before then.
We did meet before. I should say we met because I picked up Anthony's book, A Life of Unlearning, from the bookshelf. Back then, that book had the cover of a man, his neck with a sort of a pink priest dog collar on it.
Correct.
If I recollect correctly. And so I picked up this book and read it. I was a teacher of theology and ethics at the time, and that was at a Pentecostal college. And this was a book of Anthony's experience of coming out. And it was a really challenging and an interesting read. I recommend it. It's still available now. In fact, it's had 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 editions since then. It's 3, and it's been updated. It's a really fantastic read. I recommend it. After reading it, I met with Anthony, and we've been in conversation. We've had meals over 2 decades talking about the challenge of LGBTQI acceptance in Christianity and beyond. And so we're here today, really, I guess, to spend a little bit of time hearing a little bit about Anthony's story. And Jem and I also want to talk to Anthony and each other about pride and claiming pride in the context of shame. So welcome, Anthony. It's great to have you.
I have been so looking forward to this. When I saw the first podcast that you did, I was so touched. It was so beautiful. You were so vulnerable, so authentic. I just thought, this is fantastic. Please, can I come and join you one day?
Oh, we are delighted to host you. And I guess because you've played a seminal role in my own journey, and you respected my place as a conservative person originally in a conservative context, and walked a journey of me coming out's not the right word because I'm still straight, but opening up to new ways of thinking and embracing queer people. So I guess we should just give people a context, Anthony, why we're talking to you. You have a background in the church. Why don't you just give us a sort of a précis of your story?
Little Reader's Digest thing? Yeah. So I was, when I left the church, I was a very, very well-known preacher. So I used to preach in all the mega Pentecostal churches around Australia. So, could be preaching to 5,000 one weekend, and, founded Youth Alive, New South Wales as well. So very, very popular.
This was the early days of the sort of emergence of Hillsong and all of the
Correct.
big mega churches in Australia.
So Brian started Hillsong when I started Every Believer Evangelism. Before that, I pioneered churches, and my wife and I travelled in a caravan and lived by faith. We'd done that, and then came to Sydney and, started Every Believer Evangelism, which is an evangelistic ministry.
Yeah. And you, in your book, you talk about struggling to sort of repress your the fact that you were gay and the different sort of struggles you had. You, for example, had experiences of conversion therapy, and I mean, you got to read the book to get this. But how do you sort of
It's a page
summarize?
turner.
Yeah, because we want to talk about other things, but tell us just a little bit about that experience, and maybe because we're interested in pride, how that experience sort of formed a set of formed some shame and that sort of.
Well, I think probably the best place to start with that, Shane, is with just the society that I was growing up in. Like the police commissioner of the day, Colin Delaney, said that as the police commissioner, he wanted to do two things: to reduce the road toll and to wipe homosexuality out of Sydney.
Yeah, it's
And it was like a cancer.
That's the police commissioner.
Yeah, that's the police commissioner. Of course, mental health professionals. I was 2 when the American Psychiatric Association decided that homosexuality was a mental disorder.
Yep.
Paranoia and all that sort of stuff. So as I began to become aware of who I was, so mental health professionals were trying to cure gay people, homosexuals, and also there was always a threat of being arrested and going to go to jail. So there was already shame around that. I do 2 things. Number 1, don't tell a soul. Keep it a secret. This was in high school. And do everything you can to change it. And that was what got me to a point where I just became so depressed that I thought of taking my own life.
Right.
Can I just jump in here? I'm truly alarmed as a young person listening to this experience, where I guess I was around but too young to understand what was happening. I kind of came into adulthood as everything had changed. So this was so recently, and there was a police commissioner wanting to eradicate homosexuality, just to acknowledge the true blessing of the modern world, that I don't have to deal with that, because I'm so moved by your experience of owning who you are in that state of affairs. It's truly abhorrent.
Challenging times they were. I wrote about this recently, about how would I ever connect with other gay men to find out who I was. The only place to me as a teenager was in the local park, in beats and things like that, which, I was raped and I was robbed and I was bashed and all these things because there was no protection. So after all this, then I thought God could help me here. And that's when I became a born-again Christian. Then, of course, what was being written about at that time, like I think of David Wilkinson, The Cross of the Switchblade. David Wilkinson wrote, that you have to really hate yourself. You have to despise your homosexuality. So you develop intense self-hatred. And then, when I went to Bible college, it wasn't gone. I went through exorcisms. Then I came back to Australia and it was still there. But I know I wanted to serve God and I had to get rid of this thing. And so I put myself into a rehabilitation type program where it was like what we would call today conversion therapy, But
and so, what was what did they do in these conversion therapy?
Well, in this particular program, it was very much about gender conforming. So I had to always work outside the house, not inside. That was woman's work, like washing up or cleaning. I was being taught how to change the oil in a combi. They went through my wardrobe and removed.
So gender practices would cure you from your gay urges.
Yes, well, you've got to be a man. Because all gay men, of course, are feminine, apparently.
Yeah, changing this oil just really makes me want to be with women.
And then also wardrobe, I had to dress a certain way. And really the idea was that if you are in a protected environment for an extended period of time, that your natural heterosexuality will start to come to the fore because your homosexuality will disappear. But of course, it doesn't work that way. It's with you all the time.
Yeah, and I guess there's this inbuilt, because there's this assumption that homosexuality is a mental illness. In Christianity, it gets added to the notion that it's a sin. And these notions of we're all insignificant, broken, sinful people in the place of a mighty God, which you still get with purity culture and different ways of thinking. It gets right into the core of your sense of self and your self-understanding. And I can imagine that's extremely psychologically damaging. It's interesting, isn't it, that the assumption that homosexuality then was a mental illness is actually causing, for many people, the trauma that creates mental illness, and then society treats that in sort of self-justifying ways. It then notes, for example, that suicide rates among gay men or transgender women and men are higher than among cis people. Therefore, the fault is not the way in which society is shaming and suppressing and repressing people. It's being queer itself that's the problem. And so it creates this sort of cycle of trauma and horror, doesn't it?
And within the conservative Christianity, you will often get those statements where people will think that we're sick because we're gay, lesbian, or trans, and that there's something wrong with us, but they don't realize that they're actually the source of it. The source of shame, the source of, I mean, for me, and I'm sure it is for many gay people within those and trans people within those environments, where you never hear a positive thing about being gay, lesbian, or trans. So, even if nothing is said, there's this underlying subliminal sense of something's not right. There's a secret here. This is bad. I can't tell anybody, So it keeps being perpetrated. But I remember those times of intense self-hatred and self-loathing. I'm such a bad person, God, please forgive me. I promise I'll never do it again, and just this cycle. And as you say,
you'd try for a little while and then the urges would come back.
Yeah. I think the longest I went without being intimate with another man was 12 months.
Right. And you were married at the time? This is prior to the marriage?
Prior to the...
Yeah.
No. During the marriage. Before the marriage, I doubt that I would have lasted 12 months.
Yeah.
But because it was constant. What happened for me, Shane, was that this thing became like a sexual addiction for me, which actually, that was created in my teen years and then was reinforced because the thing you resist persists.
Yeah.
And that was reinforced during my Christian experience and then marriage and then the whole thing blew up in the end.
Yeah. And it is another example of where repression causes you to act in unhealthy ways, but then that religious environment is treating the unhealthy actions as proof that your homosexuality is evil. And so again, this thing is causing this unhealthy behavior and then blaming you for that same unhealthy behavior.
It's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah. Tell us about, so you were a very well-known minister.
And a great preacher.
A great preacher, absolutely. You don't preach before thousands without great skills. And then you decided you met a man, you decided that you couldn't do this any longer. And so, because I think coming out when you're famous, at least within that community, is even more shame inducing and difficult. What was the experience like for you? Of ultimately coming out.
It was very complex. It's not simple. So I had fallen in love with a guy, and that had forced me to face the reality that my 22 years of exorcisms, programs, counseling, daily prayer had achieved nothing, and I was still gay. And I was very tired. I was 40, coming up for my 40th birthday. And for the first time in my life, I realized that my orientation was not really about sex. It was about love. And it was about intimacy. It was about affection. It was about tenderness. It was like all these things that I had never experienced in all those 22 years. And I wanted it. But of course, that meant I was going to hurt the people I love most in the world. Then it would be very, very traumatic and devastating for a lot of people. But I just could not live a lie anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because, again, read the book. It's a fascinating book. You came out, it was traumatic for your family. I do note, let me just jump forward. I don't know, man, we're talking 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it is now. I notice I've seen you with your daughters and you've had beautiful restoration and it's all worked out okay
It has.
when you start to become true to yourself. But let's just step back a bit. So did you experience rejection? Was that shame entrenched, or actually the rejection became irrelevant because you started to be true to yourself? How was that transition period when you came out in that conservative environment?
When I was planning on leaving, my wife discovered a letter that I'd written to Jason. And then the proverbial shit hit the fan. Can I swear?
Yes.
Okay,
This
right,
is
the shit really hit the fan. The end result of that was that I felt I'd been deceived by the devil, and I confessed to the national executive of the Assemblies of God, and I confessed to so many people, and then I was told to do a public confession. So, here I am standing up in front of a church with hundreds of people telling them that I have failed God, them, my family, everything. I've committed adultery and that I was resigning from the ministry. So that level of trauma and shame for that meant that I cried for several weeks every day, just try to get the courage to put my feet on the ground and face the day because I had no job anymore. I had nothing.
You don't just give away. You're losing your relationship, your marriage, your profession. No wonder people, by the way, struggle to come out the longer they're entrenched in those conservative places because the price is high. But the price of staying in there is higher, isn't it?
Yeah, it will kill you in the end.
Yeah. I wanted to talk today and I guess about, that transition from shame to pride. Pride's an interesting concept for me. I've got a background in virtue ethics, as you know, and pride has a lot of thinking in virtue ethics. Right the way through to Aristotle, the sort of ultimate position in which the virtuous person is looking to become is to become the megalopsychos, which is just the great souled one. So to become the person who is proud of themselves and what they've become, the virtuous person. And it's really interesting, this notion of pride, because in the Greek context, the the megalocycos had to be a man, because the way in which the virtuous person was framed was in terms of sort of masculine traits.
Uh-huh.
The virtuous person could never be a woman, for example, could never be a gay person, could never be a trans person, could never be a disabled person, because the characteristics of those persons were sort of anti that strong image. And it's really interesting, I think, reclaiming pride and learning, for example, to what does it mean to be proud or to reclaim pride in a body that I struggle with and feel weak with, that I'm vulnerable with, and what does it mean to experience pride as a transgender person? So I'm going to come back to you for a second, Anthony, but I might switch over to Jem to just get your take on pride and shame, because yours has also been a journey from shame to pride. So let's go from Jem to Anthony to sort of talk about shame and pride.
Yeah, so pride is a very recent notion for me, one that I have, I guess, never recognized that I hadn't experienced. I'm very familiar with shame. I had a similar experience to you, I think, in high school, of having a whole identity that I had to hide from people, lest I be rejected, or my psychology would have perceived it as life-threatening. But yeah, a lot of shame around the simplest things of my own being that made me happy. And I guess the way I came to acknowledge this was through Mardi Gras. I was really looking forward to Mardi Gras this year as my first Pride experience, to celebrate publicly being trans among a beautiful rainbow tribe of people who were also feeling proud of themselves for just being who they are. And then I ended up getting COVID 2 days beforehand and was super disappointed and questioning the universe. Why now? Why would you block this really important experience from me? But I ended up having a very synchronistic evening where I was at home by myself and was kind of celebrating Pride on my own, did my makeup, got glamorous, was playing some music and dancing and feeling good, and then started watching some TV. The amazing Sense8, if you haven't watched it, check it out. It's really a beautiful picture of humanity, a feel-good TV show that celebrates human pride in diversity. And it just so happened to be an episode where one of the main characters spoke at a gay pride rally in Brazil. And it was the first time he'd ever publicly announced that he was gay. He was a character based in Mexico City, where they are more conservative. And so he'd had to hide it his whole life and had a whole career as an actor where he'd charaded as a heterosexual man. And then he spoke at this Pride talk, and it was a really simple but pure, heartfelt speech. Essentially, him just feeling the excitement of saying, "I am a gay man," publicly for the first time ever, and it rocked me to my core, feeling that vicariously through him. And then he said something which was along the lines of, "I never thought that I could be proud of myself publicly for this." And it just really hit me all at once that I had also never realized that I could be proud of the things that make me me. And that even to that day, I'd been I'd been transitioning for 3 months or so, and I had accepted myself, but it was still not pride. It was still just, oh, well, look, I guess if this is going to be what it is, then I just have to accept it, and I'll try and make the most of it. But I wasn't proud to be me and proud to own these parts of myself that bring me joy. And so that's a blockage. And I
Yeah.
never realized until that moment, and I just broke down and cried profusely at how much I felt all of the damage I'd done to myself in 26 years of living. Every time I felt joy at something, or an inclination to do something, or an interest, and just immediately shaming myself for that. It's like taking your identity and just beating it into a submissive pulp so that it can't shine and be what it is. And so since then, I have begun a journey of pride, attempting to be proud of myself every day. And it's obviously an ongoing journey, because it's hard to just immediately shed learnt habits of shame and disgust towards oneself. But yeah, the pride is, I realized in that moment that pride is a really important part of being a human being, and that we need to feel proud of ourselves in order to be ourselves. Otherwise, we're just going to suffer.
I think too, Jem, that we've had years of negative conditioning,
Yeah.
which is really ingrained within our psyche and within our being, that does not automatically get released just like that, because you accept. And, I often talk about the steps of coming out. And for me, my final coming out, which was leaving and walking away from everything 12 months after that big confession and everything. And it was never a proud, empowering coming out. It was like you're talking about, it's a reluctant acceptance.
Mm.
What choice have I got? I've spent all my life fighting this thing. It's not working. I may as well and just live it. And I plan to commit suicide at 50. That was the plan.
Oh.
So, but then I found myself a place of personal resolution through spirituality and through looking at the supposed verses which condemn homosexuality. And I did have a moment, and I talk about, so people can reluctantly accept these things, but there's still shame.
Mm-hmm.
People could accept, and the shame's gone, but beyond that is another experience that not everybody gets to enjoy, which is celebration.
Mm.
And it's celebrating who we are, which is so wonderful. And I love being gay.
Yes.
And and I love my tribe. And if there was such a thing as reincarnation, and God said, "Well, what do you want to be next time?" I said, well, "Let's do that gay thing again. That was fun."
Beautiful.
Yeah, I love the comment about loving the tribe. Resonates with me, because, and maybe pride can emerge firstly from being proud of this tribe. So in disability, for me, it's pride in the accomplishment of the disabled community who fought exclusion, segregation, violence, and changed the world in the 1980s. At the same sort of time as queer people were, we talk about it's impossible for the gay man, the effeminate man, to, I'm just using slurs. I'm not, that's not my
You're
word.
fine. I could
But,
cope.
so I just want to realize this is not me saying this. It's impossible for that person to be the great souled one, but actually it's the queer person, the courage it took to come out, the courage it took to march the Pride March to change society so that a generation on from where the police commissioner wants to get rid of all gays, Jem can come out in a different society. There's still absolute challenges, but it's a different world. And she can do that because your generation brought substantial change. And I guess I would just thank you for that, because certainly in Christianity, you've been fighting this fight a long time. And there is a lot to be proud of, in the long journey and the gracious journey that you've had, both with people who have been willing to change their thought and move along, but also with a church that just continues to live in the 1970s and worse, in the sort of destructive behavior. So, yeah, thank you. So for me, it's pride in that community and what's been done in the tribe. For me, I found that tribe in disability. And so you can have pride in that community and your part in it. And yeah, it's
Well, I think you're amazing too. You are an amazing
it's
person.
the mutual celebration club.
No, it's true. What you've been through and what you've accomplished, and what you've done. I do stand in awe of what you do, Shane.
But we're talking about you here, Anthony. So yeah, I mean,
let's just say we're all fabulous.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess it's worth, tell us a little bit about what you've done in the years since, the people who don't know. What's been your contribution to this space?
Thinking about this today, I remember there have been several peak experiences or things in your and my relationship which stood out to me. And so this might be helpful to some people, because I've always taken not an adversarial approach, but an ambassadorial type approach of reaching out. And I remember walking down to the coffee shop to meet you for the first time at Moore Park Gardens.
Yep, me too.
And you were the first person, here I am going to meet a lecturer at the Assemblies of God Bible College who wants to have a conversation with me. I think he's in a questioning phase. And something said to me, I do hear voices sometimes. Something said to me, don't try to win any arguments, just build a relationship. And I didn't go with any agenda.
Yeah.
Just to be a decent, have a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's how our friendship evolved from that. But that taught me a great lesson, Shane.
Yeah.
I learned from that.
I don't know that I've talked about some of this publicly, because one of the things, so we developed a friendship immediately, really, didn't we?
I didn't think you were too bad a guy.
And we then just for example, we did the video, which you can still get on your Ambassadors and Bridge Builders website.
Yes.
It's a horrifying video, because I look at that and I was a skinny little conservative thing then, wasn't I? I think I was wearing a suit and all. But
you went in a wheelchair.
That was before the wheelchair, so that is true. And then we went for dinner with a few friends, and I can remember the surprise of that dinner. We had Penny and Natasha, yourself and Andrew, and Penny and Natasha were pregnant with IVF at that time. And I wrote this little piece called An Illicit Dinner. Which was my sort of recollection of that night, and of how shocked my community would be if they heard that I'd had a dinner with Anthony. And I wrote this up and I sent it to Anthony. And I was taking a risk at that time, because my job no doubt was at stake, and I certainly wasn't prepared to be risking that at that point in time. And Anthony never betrayed that trust. He always just respected where I was at the journey.
I did do something very silly though, didn't I?
That's right. There was an instance of, I think what happened, you mentioned somewhere. What was that?
What happened was in my excitement and not understanding academia, I just put in my newsletter, Pentecostal theologian converted, without ever mentioning who you were or anything, but just the excitement of that. I was just reading that illicit dinner. We should tell people the reason it was entitled illicit dinner was that you were banned from seeing me.
I can't remember. This is so long ago, Anthony. You're stretching my memory. No, I think it was because I was going to church the next day,
Right.
and I remember someone greeting me saying, "Oh, a faithful theologian," as though that was a contradictory thing. And I'm thinking, you wouldn't be saying that if you knew where I was the night before. So that was where that title came from. But
I remember too that night when we're sitting around having dinner, we'd said grace, we were just talking about things, and I looked over at you and I saw something happen. There was a moment where there was this transition where, for me, my observation was you've had this realization, oh my God, here it is Friday night. I'm with a lesbian couple who are about to have a baby. I'm with two gay men, and it feels so normal.
yeah, I think that's what it is. When you're brought up in, that's precisely, it was just, hold on a second. These guys and girls are beautiful, spiritual, kind, and I think the way in which the the homosexuality is sinful message is maintained is everything about the gay lifestyle is evil, broken. It's either it's that sort of it's either um, they're either broken or they're whores, or one version of the negative story there. And what you get when you meet um, gay men, lesbian women, trans people is actually just people who are kind and generous and spiritual. And I think that was a surprise too. In fact, what I've come to realize is the most spiritual people I know now are often gay people, because they've gone through a real test of their faith, often a difficult journey. And so nothing um, like meeting people who you don't understand to start to change you.
And there was those sort of things that helped to break down the barriers, like I remember, who should I, because Ellie was meant to come as well, but she wasn't able to come that night.
Oh, she did come, didn't she?
No,
Oh, it was just me.
yes,
Okay.
she was unwell or something happened, but she couldn't come. But, it was about getting people around and just having a normal conversation, normalizing this thing. And because you had not met many out gay people,
Yeah.
and all these were from Pentecostal backgrounds. So, we had a common background.
We
So,
were in a very conservative little bubble.
Uh,
So, yeah. Well,
I'm hearing a lot of interesting things in this, and
Tell
annoying
us.
not having my own microphone, so I'm going to steal this one. But yeah, the interesting thing that I'm hearing in this is essentially just that society, or so for trans people, I guess you could say the Christian community for gays, but society as a whole also um, preaches this message that to be proud, you have to earn it. You have to earn pride. You have to be the what was that word again?
megalocycos.
The megalocycos. Pride is something that is only endowed to people who are worthy. And it creates this whole idea that people aren't there are people that aren't worthy. And that's a curious notion to me. Because I guess for my experience, I had all of this shame my whole life, feeling like I was broken or ill or something like that. But at the same time, in my interactions with people, I was friendly and loving, and people liked me, and my life was normal in so many ways. And so there was always this weird tension that I couldn't rectify. But I would still lived under the notion that I was broken, because society has this view that you have to be a certain way in order to be proud of yourself. And by sharing our just humanity, by just being loving and nice and friendly to people, like when you were saying before, that something told you not to try and win any arguments, but just to like connect and to build a relationship. That screamed to me this intuition that we can be proud of just being humans. We can be proud of our humanity. It just by virtue of being, we should be proud of ourselves. And then from that pride, we can be loving. If we're proud of ourselves, then we can love others. And so for me, there's this the crappy feedback loop is that society tells us that we need to be ashamed of ourselves if we don't fit this certain mold, and that makes us bad people. And then, of course, we can't be proud of ourselves. How can you love people when you hate yourself? And so we need pride to start with. We need to be proud of ourselves. We need to be able to own the things that make us who we are. And, unless the way that you are is causing mass suffering to people, I don't see why you shouldn't.
I had to learn to love my humanity
Mm.
because within our background, the Pentecostal world, everything to do with humanity is flesh, it's evil, everything's wrong. And I learned to embrace my humanity with all of its wonderful imperfections and flaws and mistakes and failures and everything. It's all the rich tapestry
Yes.
that makes us who we are. Like,
Adds flavor to the broth.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we were all perfect, we'd be exactly the same. And
Yeah.
then there wouldn't be any point of interacting or relating in any way. It's the differences and the diversity and the imperfections that make humanity so beautiful.
And we grow, Jem, don't we? We grow.
We
We
grow.
grow through these experiences, and we learn. We become better people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's like because of that, the human journey is to fail so that we can learn, and so we need to be proud of our failings because that's the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always say that, like, to me now, my belief is, you're never actually off the path.
Mm.
So every detour, every dead end, I look at my life and people might say, oh, you've made so many mistakes. Well, I don't think so much as I was on a journey. And it's those things that we've previously classed as mistakes, which actually have been the things which have built character and strength and courage within me.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love it. Yeah, it's all an adventure, and
Yeah.
adventures involve getting stuck in the mud and getting filthy and pulling through.
And for you, my dear man, what a journey it's been for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you got to choose your life, you might not go down some of those tributaries, but what have you missed out on? And look, I can say that about incurring a spinal cord injury, or because some of those tributaries you choose, some of them you don't.
Yep.
And you become who you become through them all. Yeah.
You inspire people.
Oh gosh, I always get embarrassed by that.
What do you say to that?
Thank you.
Thanks, I know.
Thanks, I know. Yeah.
I mean, and that's where pride gets like cocky, right? Let's not confuse pride with narcissism, which is actually the virtue. So what's the opposite of a virtue? The vice.
But I guess it is true that our inability to accept praise or honor is, I guess, an indication of how difficult we find pride. So that's sort of intriguing how entrenched that that I was going to say that humility, but I'm actually, I think pride and humility are not the opposite to one another. I think they actually go together. Having a sense or the recognition that actually we are pretty insignificant, that the world goes on without us, that we're small and need each other, isn't the opposite of pride. And I think sometimes that's, there's this sense you get in religious context and maybe in others as well, that you've got to let go of pride and own your insignificance. But I think the best form of humility is one that is able to be proud at the same time, because then it's a humility that doesn't shrink us and make us weak and sort of passive, but it's a humility that embraces and honors our smallness and enables us to take those small little steps, such as loving your neighbor at a coffee shop and meeting and learning from that different person.
I was talking with a pastor recently, and I was saying to him, like, no, I'm cool. Like, everything's right with me and God. Like, there's actually no problems. And he started to quote a Bible verse to me, which you'd be very familiar with as well. The heart is desperately wicked. Who could know? Is it Ezekiel or Isaiah or something or other? And it's just, the heart is desperately wicked. So he was saying, are you just living in self-deception? And he started talking about, how bad he was. And I thought, well, you obviously need God in a really bad way. I would want you running around society, the things that you're thinking and doing. No, I'm cool.
If the heart is deceiving us, then what do we follow? What's our path?
Well, then the path in that context is obedience to an authority, and so that way of thinking actually becomes a form of control and manipulation, because the person then is unable to act according to their own developed, mature ethics. There's so much destructive. I mean, gosh, I could do a whole podcast on the negative side of that form of theology, because it's what builds these cycles of oppression and shame. It's what causes people to submit to authorities that they shouldn't. It's what causes people not to own their own decisions and their own sense of taking moral responsibility for themselves, and often, of course, they're just pious ways of thinking for the prideful person underneath it as well. So it's a form of pretense. But when the ministers are saying that, they're keeping you in your place, aren't they?
Yeah.
So is it all just systems of control then? Like you said before, that it's hard for humans to take a compliment, to feel proud. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily our nature, right? As much as we're probably programmed into that, because conformity is such an important part of our worldview. I mean, what do you think about that?
Oh, look, I don't know. I think there's sociological and psychological reasons for our relationships that make these inevitable. So I don't think we're just talking Christianity here. I think we're dealing with social relationships. But I think if we unmask them and are aware of them, then we can be the sort of people that help that ourselves escape those forms of control and help others too. So look, I think we're coming to an end of this podcast, Anthony. It's been so delightful to be your friend for all these years, and I'm sure we've got more to come. It's funny to say all these years, but it's been a couple of decades, and it's been really a very important friendship in my life. And
mine too.
Thank you for joining us today. Is there anything else you wanted to say to Change listeners?
I would like to say something else, that, we do often hear criticism of our pride marches and people speaking about, having a sense of pride about their LGBTQ identity. And I often say to them, well, the reason you often don't get gay pride is you've never experienced gay shame.
Yeah.
And there's that moment where the switch is flicked, as we talked before about the celebration, the complete, to go from self-loathing to self-hatred to self-love. is quite a journey. This is the healthy one,
Yeah.
loving who we are.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What a great way to end. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony. Loving who we are.
That's it, Jem.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.